Welcome into the Brent Hughes Show, live on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you want to listen. You can find me. Bunch of head coach openings in the NFL. Guys are getting fired left and right. There are openings in Jacksonville. Urban Meyer was on his way out. In Denver, no more Vic Fangio. There's openings in Minnesota. Openings in Chicago. Opening in Miami, shockingly. Opening for the New York Giants in the Mecca. John Gruden out of there in October. There's an opening for the Vegas Raiders. Many coaches being considered, college and pros, for these openings. None more important than the Chicago Bears. That's who we're talking about today. The head coach options in Chicago. So we're starting with none other than the news from Brent Hughes. And the big news out of Chicago is that Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace were fired on the Monday after the offseason, just as I predicted. I said in a video a month ago that I was confident Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace would be fired on the Monday after the season. The Bears don't fire guys in the middle of the season. The organization is too nice, too classy for that. So the Bears are looking for a new coach. There are plenty of options. The news is that they're interviewing multiple guys for defensive coordinators. That includes Colts defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus, Bills defensive coordinator Leslie Frazier, Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive coordinator Todd Bowles, Dan Quinn for the Dallas Cowboys. On the offensive side, Packers offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett, Bills Brian Daboll, Buccaneers Byron Leftwich. And in terms of former head coaches they're considering, that is the surprising firee from the Miami Dolphins, Brian Flores, as well as Super Bowl champion in 2015, Doug Peterson. If you want to ask me, I think the Bears are going to have a hard time selling a defensive coordinator to the fan base. Leslie Frazier, Matt Eberflus, Dan Quinn, Todd Bowles, they've all run fantastic defenses this year. Over the last number of years, the Colts have been 10th or better in points allowed, so Matt Eberflus is responsible for that. Leslie Frazier, he was actually a former Bear, won the Super Bowl with them in '85. In my opinion, the Bills' defense is a little up and down, but it's been one of the higher-ranked defenses the last number of years. So he's a candidate for that, a Bears connection there. We know one thing about Todd Bowles. We know he's a great defensive coordinator. He's put together a great defense in Arizona. He won Assistant of the Year there under Bruce Arians in 2014 for the Cardinals. He was hired by the Jets in 2015 and won 10 games, starting weird quarterbacks like Geno Smith, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Josh McCown. Problem is, the offense was near the bottom of the league. Now, those quarterbacks are terrible, but couldn't get the offense going. That's a scary sight if you're a Bears fan, trying to hire a guy who has a hard time putting an offense together. That shows me that maybe he doesn't have the connections to hire a good enough offensive coordinator for this football team. So I'm a little nervous about that. He was fired after winning 4 games in 2018, after he won 10 games in 2015. So just 3 years later, he was out in New York, went back to being a defensive coordinator under Bruce Arians again, this time in Tampa Bay, leads that defense to a great showing all the way up to the Super Bowl, dominates Patrick Mahomes. That defense is widely responsible for that Super Bowl. Other guys the offense played well, but that defense, it just destroyed the offensive line of the Kansas City Chiefs, and that led them to their championship. Dan Quinn, there's no doubt that the defense for the Dallas Cowboys has taken a complete 180 this year. It was an absolute disaster under Mike Nolan last year. He had to be fired because it was like they were incompetent on defense. Dan Quinn comes in after being fired by the Falcons. We know he was a good defensive coach, winning a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. He was responsible for that great defense. Gets a job in Atlanta, gets to the Super Bowl, lost the Super Bowl. It hasn't been the same since. They get rid of him. The defense in Dallas was one of the worst of all time last year. This year, it's one of the best. Micah Parsons looks like a star under his leadership, as well as many other players on that side of the ball. Diggs as well was leading the league in interceptions for a long time. So Dan Quinn is an option on defense. Another concern for him, we just saw him as a head coach in Atlanta. He got run out. So personally, if I'm the Chicago Bears, I would not pick a former defensive coordinator to be the next head coach. It's not because I don't think these guys are good. It's obvious that these guys are running great defenses around the NFL, but the Bears' defense hasn't been the problem in the last number of years. We need to get a guy in the building who can coach Justin Fields to being one of the great quarterbacks of the NFL. He has all the talent. We've got to get a guy in here developing Justin Fields. There's a few things that a lot of analysts acknowledge he can fix up. His throwing motion can be a little bit quicker. We want to get him better at the line of scrimmage, audibling, calling plays from the line of scrimmage. We need a guy in there who can do that. So to me, we've got to prioritize more of an offensive mind. So personally, I'm ruling out the defensive coordinators. They might not do that because the Bears love defense, but that's what I'm doing. So now we're looking at the offensive guys. The Packers offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, is an option. In my opinion, this is Matt LaFleur's offense. Matt LaFleur runs the offense. He designed the offense. He implemented the offense. Him and Aaron Rodgers are the ones who call the plays. And so Nathaniel Hackett might be the offensive coordinator. I'm sure he does a lot of work. I'm sure he's LaFleur's right-hand man. But I think the success of that football team has a lot to do with Aaron Rodgers. And when it's not Aaron Rodgers, because listen, we haven't seen Matt LaFleur have success without Aaron Rodgers. So we know it's at least Aaron Rodgers, and then behind him, the credits to Matt LaFleur because he's calling the plays, not the offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett. We just had that in Matt Nagy, a guy from Kansas City who didn't call the plays, but the offense was great, so we thought he was going to be great. Not the case. Bills' Brian Daboll. Bears fans might be scared of that one, if no other reason than the fact that he sports a bald head and a beard just like Matt Nagy. It might scare guys away. But he was the assistant coach of the year in 2020. He's credited with developing Josh Allen, who albeit is a little bit up and down, but when you look at Josh Allen from his first year in the NFL to where he is last year as a potential MVP candidate to this year, probably another great season in the books for Josh Allen and the Bills, winning the division, another playoff year, I think for at least the third consecutive year. Brian Daboll is, they say, responsible for developing Josh Allen. So it's something to consider because we need a guy to develop Justin Fields. So there's Brian Daboll. Byron Leftwich for the Bucs. I think it is always great to get in a guy with Super Bowl experience. That offense won a Super Bowl last year. Byron Leftwich is responsible for it. Bruce Arians does not make it a secret that Byron Leftwich runs that offense. He's coaching Tom Brady. So if Tom Brady thinks he's a good coach, I'm going to take his word for it. I think Byron Leftwich has learned a lot from Tom Brady in return. So he can come to Chicago, bring a lot of those principles to Justin Fields. I think he can teach him a lot of great things from just seeing the work ethic of the GOAT over the last number of years, over the last 2 years in Tampa Bay. Byron Leftwich would be a good option. Now, when we're looking at just head coaches, right? So we've looked at the defensive guys. I'm not a fan. We've looked at the offensive guys. I think Byron Leftwich is probably the most intriguing. I think Brian Daboll is the next most intriguing after that. I think Nathaniel Hackett has fraud potential. It has fraud potential. So I'm nervous about that one. When we're looking at the head coaches, there's Doug Peterson, who won a Super Bowl championship in 2015. I definitely think he's worth the interview. I think he had good leadership in Philadelphia. I think the front office was a joke when they were trying to figure out the Carson Wentz. Why did they draft Jalen Hurts? Who should start? Well, Carson was playing bad. So Doug Peterson, it was a lot to figure out with the contracts. He was fired there because of dysfunction between the head coach and the front office. It wasn't because he was a bad football coach. They won a Super Bowl. Brian Flores. He took Tua and the Dolphins to 10 wins and one of the best defenses in the NFL. There's no doubt he can take the Bears and make us an elite defense. I think we're already a good defense. He can make us elite. There's no doubt. But with Brian Flores, we do have to go hire a great offensive guy. So there's still some of those defensive coordinator conflicts. I think in terms of an experienced guy who can come in and set a real culture, a tone setter for the Bears, I think Brian Flores is a top candidate for this job, has to be considered. But we do have to consider the fact that he's going to have to hire an offensive coordinator to develop Justin Fields, a quarterback's coach, to do that and to run this offense. He did go through a number of offensive coordinators in Miami. In his defense, he wanted to draft Justin Herbert. So he was trying to find guys to develop Tua. I guess it was harder than expected. They went through a couple offensive coaches. You can decide if that is because he didn't know what he was doing in terms of who should run the offense, since he's responsible for the defense and the overall C of the team. Or you can kind of blame that on a middle of the pack quarterback who can't really take the offense over the hump. Justin Fields is better than Tua. I don't think that's really up for discussion. but it's something to think about with Flores and these defensive guys, is that if you're going to go with a defensive-minded coach, we're going to have to hire an offensive coordinator who can develop a quarterback. So I do think the Bears should prioritize, if possible, an offensive-minded guy in this coaching search, and then bring in an established defensive coordinator like we had with Vic Fangio, who is on the market. So if you're going to ask me at the end of the day who I'm most intrigued with right now, number one, I think it's Byron Leftwich. After that, I'm looking at Brian Flores, Doug Peterson, and Brian Daboll. I think Byron Leftwich is the most interesting right now, coming off of a Super Bowl team and coaching Tom Brady. I think that could do wonders for Justin Fields. I'm a little nervous about Daboll just because the Bills' offense is up and down at times. I think Brian Flores' upside is we know he's a good head coach. Doug Peterson's a Super Bowl coach. So I think those are my top 4 guys right now when we're looking at coaches for the Bears: Byron Leftwich, Brian Flores, Brian Daboll, and Doug Peterson. Those would be at my top 4 for this job. All those other guys are great defensive coordinators. I don't want to see Dan Quinn running this football team. Todd Bowles in New York, I don't want to see it. Leslie Frazier, former Bear, good story. I don't think I trust that unless I learn more. Same with Matt Eberflus. That's kind of the recap of who the Bears are interviewing. Plenty of options. They're interviewing everyone. That's what they need to do. They need to find the right guy. Looking forward to it. Justin Fields in the offense is the priority. Make no mistake about it. See you next time.